When I first moved into the Marrow house, everyone said the same thing. "You'll get used to the noise." They said it casually, the way people talk about bad plumbing or weak water pressure. The landlord said it while handing me the keys. The old woman in 3A said it while checking her mail. Even the delivery driver, after glancing up at the building's dark windows and cracked stone facade, had muttered, "Yeah, walls are thin in there." So when I heard the first sound on my third night in apartment 4C, I told myself it was normal. At exactly 2:14 a.m., I woke to the sound of applause. Not loud, not the full roar of a theater. Just a brief, polite burst of clapping somewhere inside the walls around my bedroom, like a hidden audience was reacting to something I couldn't hear. It lasted maybe 4 seconds. Then it stopped. I lay there in the dark, staring at the water stain above my bed, waiting for it to happen again. Nothing. By morning, it felt ridiculous. Old building, pipes, neighbors, TV through the walls. Any explanation was better than the one my half-awake mind had invented at 2 in the morning. But the next night, at 2:14 exactly, it happened again. 4 seconds of applause, then silence. The night after that, it happened a third time. And the fourth night, something changed. This time, the applause lasted longer. It began as a few scattered claps, hesitant and uneven, then built into a room full of hands striking together in perfect rhythm. Slow at first, deliberate, measured, like whoever was clapping wanted to make sure I understood that it was for me. I sat up so fast I nearly fell out of bed. The sound came from the wall directly behind my headboard. When it stopped, I could still hear something else in the plaster. Movement. A soft shifting, like someone leaning back into velvet seats. The next morning I knocked on the wall. It sounded solid. I spent most of that day telling myself I was being stupid. The building was from the 1920s. It had been divided and redivided, renovated badly, patched carelessly. The hallways were crooked, the floors tilted. A closet in my living room was deeper on the inside than it looked from the outside, and one of the windows in the kitchen had been painted shut so many times it looked fused to the frame. It was a weird place. That was all. Still, when I saw the woman from 3A in the lobby that evening, I asked, "Do you hear anything at night?" She looked up from her grocery bags. "What kind of thing?" "I don't know. Clapping." For a second, her expression didn't change at all. Then she smiled too quickly. "TV. At 2 in the morning? Some people don't sleep." She walked away before I could ask anything else. That should have been enough to settle it. But that night, instead of going straight to bed, I stayed awake in the dark with my phone in my hand, waiting for 2:14. At 2:13, the apartment felt unusually still. The refrigerator had stopped humming. The pipes were quiet. Even the traffic outside seemed to disappear. Then my phone clicked over to 2:14, and from inside the wall behind my bed, applause exploded. I jerked backward. It was louder than before, so loud I could feel the vibration in the plaster. It sounded close, impossibly close, like there was a packed audience hidden inches beyond the wallpaper. And beneath it, for the first time, I heard a single voice. A woman's voice, low and smooth, speaking over the applause as if introducing someone onto a stage. I couldn't make out the words. The clapping continued for nearly 10 seconds this time, then cut off all at once. Not faded, not dwindled. Stopped, like a conductor had dropped a hand. The silence afterward felt worse than the sound. The following day, I went to the library and looked up the building. Marrow House had originally been called
The Bellwether Hotel. Built in 1928.
12 stories, though now it only had 10 occupied floors. The top 2 had been closed off decades ago after some kind of structural issue. There were old newspaper photos of the lobby, back when it had chandeliers and a grand staircase. Men in hats, women in evening gloves, a rooftop ballroom, a private dining hall. There was even an old advertisement from 1931. Live music nightly. The Bellwether Supper Theater. A show you will never forget. The article attached to it mentioned a small performance venue inside the hotel, used for cabaret, magic acts, comedy, and private late-night shows for guests. I stared at the grainy photo for a long time. The theater was small and elegant. Curved rows of seats, a low stage, heavy curtains, decorative wall panels shaped like open hands. Below the image was a short caption. The Bellwether's intimate palm room became famous for its unusually responsive audiences. Responsive audiences. I almost laughed. Instead, I printed the page and took it home. That night, I searched the apartment more carefully. I measured the bedroom wall that shared the sound. Then I stepped into the hallway and estimated the width of the neighboring unit. The numbers didn't work. There should have been another 3 feet of space behind my bedroom wall. Not much, but enough to notice. Enough for a maintenance gap, maybe, or old ventilation shafts, or some sealed service corridor from before the renovations. At 11 p.m., I knocked on the door of 4B, the apartment on the other side of the wall. No answer. I knocked again. Nothing. I checked the mailbox downstairs later. 4B had no name on it, just a strip of yellowed tape over an older label that had been peeled away. That night, I dragged my bed across the room and slept on the couch. At 2:14 a.m., the applause came from the bedroom wall again. Even from the living room, I could hear it clearly. And the woman's voice was louder.
"Ladies and gentlemen," she said, warm and delighted, "thank you for returning tonight." The clapping rose around her, then stopped. I didn't sleep at all after that. In the morning, I called the landlord and told him there was noise in the walls. He sighed in a way that suggested he'd had this conversation before. "I'll send maintenance." "Can they check the space behind my bedroom wall?" "What space?" "There has to be some kind of gap. The measurements don't line up. Old buildings are strange. Can they check it anyway?" A pause. "I'll see what I can do." No one came that day, or the next. On the 7th night, I made the mistake of speaking during the applause. The sound began at 2:14 as usual, but this time I stood in the bedroom doorway and said, out loud, "What do you want?" The applause stopped immediately. I don't mean it faded or hesitated. It ended in the middle of a clap, like a recording had been switched off. Then I heard a murmur ripple through the wall, dozens of voices whispering to each other, interested, surprised. The woman laughed softly. "Oh," she said, "he can hear us now." My throat closed. I backed into the hall, unable to look away from the wall. The wallpaper there had a faded floral pattern, curled at one seam near the baseboard. As I watched, that seam lifted slightly. Not much. Just enough to make it look like someone on the other side had pressed a fingertip against it. Then a man's voice from within the wall said, very clearly, "Bring him out." I ran. Not out of the building. Not even out of the apartment. I ran into the bathroom and locked the door like a child hiding from thunder. I sat on the floor until dawn with every light on, listening for footsteps, voices, anything. Nothing came. By noon, I was angry with myself. Terrified, yes, but angrier than that. Angry that fear was making me ridiculous, making me crouch in my own bathroom because of sounds in a wall. So I did something practical.
I bought a stud finder, a cheap drill, and a borescope camera that connected to my phone. I told myself there would be a normal explanation. Hollow space, old pipes. Maybe someone had hidden speakers in the wall years ago as a prank. Maybe 4B wasn't empty. Maybe someone was doing a sick live stream performance project next door. Anything human would have been fine. At 8 p.m., I pressed the stud finder along the bedroom wall. The readings were erratic. Empty space where there shouldn't have been any. Then dense sections that made no sense. It was like the inside of the wall had been built, torn apart, and built again without a plan. I drilled a small hole near the baseboard. At first, the bit passed easily through plaster and lath. Then it punched through air. A cavity. I froze. For several seconds, I just stared at the dark hole, listening. Silence. I fed the camera cable inside. The screen on my phone flickered, adjusted to darkness, then resolved into a narrow, hidden space about 3 feet wide running parallel to my room. Dust, old wiring, torn insulation, and beyond that, another wall. Not the back of another apartment wall. A finished interior wall with dark patterned wallpaper and decorative molding. My pulse spiked. This wasn't a gap, it was a sealed room. I angled the camera upward. Rows of empty seats emerged from the dark. Old theater seats. Red velvet, or what had once been red velvet, lined up in shallow curved rows, disappearing into blackness. My hand went numb. I moved the camera farther. Aisle, armrests, dust, thick as ash. Then the stage. Small, low, framed by rotting curtains. At center stage stood a microphone on a brass stand, and hanging above it, barely visible in the dark, was a sign formed from cracked bulbs. Applause. I yanked the camera back so fast the cable scraped inside the wall. I didn't know how long I stood there after that, just staring at the hole as if it might explain itself. A hidden theater behind my bedroom wall. An actual theater. Not large enough to show on modern building plans, maybe. Not after all the renovations and closures and subdivisions. But real. Impossible and real. By the time the clock read 2:13 that night, I had pushed my dresser against the bedroom door and packed a duffel bag. At 2:14, applause thundered from the hole in the wall. Not muffled anymore. Open. Immediate. The sound poured through that small drilled opening like pressure, released from a sealed chamber. The woman's voice echoed as if through an old microphone. "Welcome back." More clapping. I heard laughter, coughs, the creak of seats shifting under invisible bodies. Then, in a cheerful stage whisper, she said, "He made a door." Something moved behind the wall. Not just a sound. A rush of attention, as if every head in a dark audience had turned at once toward that tiny hole. I dropped to the floor and shoved a towel against it. Instantly, dozens of hands struck the other side of the wall. Not applause this time, pounding, fast, eager, overlapping palms battering plaster from within. The wall shivered under the impact. A man laughed somewhere in that hidden room. "Bigger," he called. "Make it bigger." I grabbed the drill, jammed it into the bag, and left the apartment without my coat. I spent that night in a 24-hour diner 6 blocks away. At dawn, exhausted and shaking, I made a decision that would have been smart if I'd done it earlier. I went to the police. I did not tell them there was a ghost theater in my wall. I told them I had found an undocumented room in my building and heard people inside. That got more attention than I expected. 2 officers came with me around noon. The landlord met us in the hallway outside 4C, sweating through his collar and insisting there was no hidden room, no trespassers, no danger. The officers entered my bedroom, found the drilled hole, and peered through with flashlights. One of them frowned. "There is a cavity back there." I almost laughed with relief. "Thank you." They asked the landlord for building access. He hesitated, then admitted there was an old sealed service corridor accessible from a maintenance stairwell on the 10th floor. We all went up together. The stairwell above the 10th floor smelled strange. Old carpet, cold dust, something stale beneath it. At the top landing was a chain-locked steel door I hadn't noticed before. The landlord unlocked it with visible reluctance. Beyond was a narrow corridor lit by a single weak bulb. Doors lined one side of it. Not apartment doors, utility doors, storage, electrical, old laundry access. At the far end was a pair of decorative double doors covered by a warped plywood sheet. Even through the plywood, I could see the shape of brass handles beneath. One of the officers pulled the board loose. Behind it, in peeling gold letters across frosted glass, were the words, "Palm Room." We all stood there for a second in total silence. Then the officer tried the handle. Locked. "Key?" he asked. The landlord didn't answer immediately. "I don't have one." The officer turned. "Then we'll force it." That was when the landlord finally looked afraid. Not annoyed, not defensive. Afraid. "Don't open that," he said. The officer stared at him. "Excuse me? Please." The landlord's voice dropped. "Just don't. We can call the city. Get a crew. Board it back up." "You knew this was here?" I asked. He ignored me. The second officer stepped forward. "Sir, move aside." The landlord didn't move. Instead, he said something that made the back of my neck go cold. "It's quiet right now," he whispered. "If you open it while it's quiet, they'll think you're the show." The hallway went very still. Then, from behind the doors, there came the faint sound of a single hand clapping once. Just once. The landlord closed his eyes. The officers forced the doors. The lock gave with a dry metallic snap. They opened inward slowly, releasing a breath of cold air, so stale it felt ancient. Inside was the palm room. It was exactly what I had seen through the camera, and far worse. The room was larger than it should have been. Much larger. The ceiling arched too high for that part of the building. Rows of red seats curved away into a darkness that seemed to extend well beyond the outside walls. Dust covered everything in a soft, gray layer. But it looked undisturbed, as if no foot had touched that carpet in decades. At the far end, the stage waited under closed curtains. Above it, the broken light-up sign still spelled, "Applause." No one was there. Of course no one was there. The officers swept the room anyway. Flashlights cut across empty seats, old sconces, wall panels shaped like open hands. They checked the aisles, the backstage entrance, the projection booth at the rear. Nothing. But as we moved farther in, I began to notice something wrong with the seating. Some of the chairs were dusty. Some were not. At random places throughout the room, seat cushions looked slightly compressed, as if someone had risen from them just moments earlier. One officer touched a clean armrest and looked at his fingers. There was no dust on them. The landlord remained near the entrance, pale and rigid. He would not step onto the carpet. I went farther than I meant to. The stage pulled at me. Not in a supernatural way, not exactly. More like the terrible curiosity of standing near the edge of something and knowing you shouldn't look down. On the stage floor, just in front of the microphone stand, sat a little stack of white cards. I climbed the steps and picked up the top one. It was a program. Heavy cream paper, browned with age. At the top was printed, "The Palm Room presents one night only a new guest appearance." Below that, in a blank space where a performer's name should have been typed, someone had written in fresh black ink, "Room 4, C." My hands started shaking. At that exact moment, every door behind us slammed shut. The sound cracked through the theater like a gunshot. One officer shouted and spun toward the entrance. The other drew his weapon, flashlight beam jerking wildly over the seats. Then, from somewhere all around us, applause erupted. Loud, deafening. The entire Palm Room came alive with clapping. Invisible hands. Hundreds of them. The seats trembled with movement. Dust swirled upward in storms from cushions, as if people were rising to their feet. The sign above me flickered. Applause, applause, applause. A spotlight snapped on and pinned me to the stage. I screamed and stumbled backward, dropping the program. Out beyond the light, the theater remained dark, but no longer empty. Shapes filled the seats. Not bodies, not fully. More like the absence of darkness where people ought to be, arranged in rows, leaning forward in anticipation. The woman's voice poured from somewhere overhead, rich and delighted. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "our guest has arrived." The clapping intensified. One of the officers yelled for me to get off the stage. I tried, but the spotlight followed every movement, blinding me. Behind the curtain I heard rustling, quick footsteps, dozens of them, circling. The landlord shouted from the doorway, "Don't let them start!" "Start what?" one officer yelled back. The answer came from the audience. In perfect unison, all those unseen voices whispered, "The show." The curtains behind me twitched. Then they opened. There was no set behind them. No backstage wall, no dressing rooms. Just another room. A perfect copy of my bedroom in 4C. My bed. My lamp. My crooked bookshelf. Even the drill on the floor beside the hole in the wall. The audience applauded wildly. I backed away from it, nearly falling. The copied room was lit warmly, invitingly, but there was something wrong with the proportions. The walls seemed a little too tall, the corners bent at angles too soft and wrong. And standing just inside the copied bedroom doorway was someone shaped exactly like me. Same height, same face, same clothes, except it was smiling. I don't mean a normal smile, I mean the kind of smile people wear in old advertisements when they are pretending to be human happiness. The thing that looked like me lifted a hand and gave a tiny bow to the audience. The theater exploded with approval. One of the officers fired his gun. The sound vanished into the applause as if swallowed. The figure in my copied bedroom didn't flinch. Instead, it stepped forward onto the stage, still smiling, and in my own voice said, "Thank you for waiting." Then every light in the Palm Room went out. The next few seconds are the part I remember least clearly. Shouting, flashlight beams jerking like trapped fireflies. The audience no longer clapping, but moving, rows and rows of rising shapes slipping between seats. The air filled with the sound of velvet brushing coats, programs rustling, delighted murmurs. Something touched my elbow in the dark with fingers too cold and too dry. I ran. I found the stage steps by accident, stumbled into the aisle, and crashed into one of the officers. We both nearly fell. His flashlight beam spun across the seats, and for a fraction of a second I saw them. Faces. Dozens of them. Not dead-looking. Not decayed. Worse than that. Perfectly dressed men and women from another era, pale and patient. All with their hands folded in their laps, all staring at the stage with expressions of eager expectation. As the light crossed them, they smiled. Then the beam snapped away. Someone grabbed my jacket from behind, and I tore free. The landlord was screaming from the entrance, "Don't let it trade places with you!" I didn't understand what that meant until I heard my own voice somewhere ahead of me in the dark, calling, "This way." I froze. From the left aisle, my own voice called again, strained and frightened, "Help me!" From the right aisle, my own voice answered, "Over here." The audience began laughing softly. Not at a joke, at confusion. One of the officers cursed. The second shouted my name. Or maybe the thing wearing my voice did. I couldn't tell. Then a hand seized my wrist hard enough to hurt and dragged me toward the entrance. It was the landlord. He slammed something cold into my free hand. A room key. Old brass. Heavy. Stamped 4C. "Keep that," he hissed. "As long as you have your room, it can't seat you." I had no idea what that meant, but I clutched it anyway. We burst through the doors into the top-floor corridor. One officer came with us. The other did not. He was still somewhere inside shouting, his flashlight sweeping wildly through the dark. Then the palm room doors shut by themselves. His voice cut off. Silence flooded the corridor. The landlord fell against the wall, shaking. The remaining officer hammered on the doors and yelled his partner's name. No answer came from within. Only, after a long pause, the faint sound of applause. 3 polite seconds. Then stillness. The police brought more people later. Detectives, city inspectors, structural engineers. Statements were taken. Photos were made. I learned that the officer who vanished had no body, no trace, no exit footage. Just gone. Officially, the report called it a structural hazard and an active missing person investigation. Unofficially, everyone stopped asking questions the moment they'd stepped into the palm room themselves. The city sealed the entire top floor within 2 days. Then they sealed my apartment. Then, for reasons nobody explained to me, they allowed me one supervised visit to collect essentials. The landlord insisted on coming. When we entered 4C for the last time, the apartment looked mostly normal, except for the bedroom wall. The small hole I'd drilled was gone, not patched. Gone. The plaster there was smooth and unbroken, the wallpaper pattern continuous, as if no mark had ever touched it. The landlord saw me staring and quietly said, "It doesn't like unfinished entrances." I turned on him.
"How long have you known?" He looked older than I had ever seen him. "Since I was a kid. My father managed the building before me. His father owned it before that. And nobody thought to mention there was a theater hidden in the walls. It wasn't hidden at first." He leaned against the doorframe, watching the bedroom with the expression of someone facing an old enemy. The palm room used to be the hotel's best feature. People loved it. The audience was said to be unusually enthusiastic. Performers came from all over to play there. Singers, comics, magicians. Then acts started disappearing. I said nothing. At first people blamed the city, mob stuff, scandals, whatever made sense. But the disappearances always had one thing in common. The missing person had been on stage when the applause began. A cold pressure settled in my chest. The owner tried to shut the theater down, boarded it up. canceled shows. But the audience kept coming back. Staff heard clapping behind locked doors at night. Guests reported voices in the vents. Eventually, the hotel closed the room for good. He gave a humorless smile. For a while, that worked. Then the building was converted into apartments, and the Palm Room began making its own invitations. My apartment. Sometimes a unit near it, yes. Sometimes a hallway. Sometimes a maintenance room. It shifts. It favors people who listen. I remembered the copied bedroom on stage, the thing smiling with my face. What happens if it trades places? He didn't answer immediately. Finally, he said, "The audience likes familiarity. A good performance requires a convincing replacement." I wanted to keep asking questions, but just then I noticed something on the floor, near the baseboard, behind where my bed had been. A white card. I picked it up. Another program.
This one was blank, except for a handwritten note on the back. "Thank you for staying until the end." Below that, in smaller writing, "Tomorrow night, encore performance." I looked at the landlord. "We're leaving. Now." He didn't argue. I moved that same evening into a short-term rental across the city. For the first week, I barely slept. Every time a pipe clicked or a neighbor shut a cabinet, adrenaline slammed into me so hard I thought I'd pass out. But there was no applause, no voices, no copied rooms appearing in the dark. I began, slowly, horribly, to think it was over. Then, on the 8th night at exactly 2:14 a.m., I woke to a soft burst of clapping from inside my closet. Just 4 seconds. Then silence. I sat up in bed, unable to breathe. The closet door stood half open. Inside hung 3 shirts, 2 jackets, and the cheap extra blanket the rental owner had left folded on the shelf. Nothing else. Nothing visible. But from the crack of darkness behind the clothes came the faintest scent of old dust and velvet. The next day, I checked the closet measurements. The depth didn't line up with the hallway wall outside. That evening, I found the brass key from 4C in my jacket pocket. I know I brought it with me from Marrow House, I know that much. What I don't know is how the tag attached to it changed. The metal tag used to read 4C. Now it reads, Azel 4, Seat C. I haven't opened the closet since last night. At 2:14, the applause comes again. A little longer each time. And now, just before it starts, I hear a woman's voice from the dark behind the hanging coats, warm and delighted, speaking to a room I can't see. "Ladies and gentlemen," she says, "thank you for returning." Then there is the sound of programs opening, seats creaking, people leaning forward, waiting for me to step into the light.